In a moment, we're going to be hearing from Paul about building information modeling, and I had a look through his slides, and I've had a chat with him. It's also really interesting what Laura was talking about, and it made me think I'm acting as an expert witness right now on a case that's in Sydney, Australia, and the building, this is a very significant building. It's got a 3-story deep basement. It's got 2 very tall towers on it, and the construction started in 2019. So that's not long ago, and it hasn't even finished building yet, and the basement is leaking badly. And so they've asked me to act as an expert witness, but they're not, I don't get to do a site visit, so it's all kind of trawling through the info via various lawyers. And trying to get the information, it's just infuriating, and it all comes like coded, and it's on this horrible, if only they used WeTransfer. And so you're trying to get through this information, there's just too much of it, and none of the right information. And all I'm trying to understand is, well, firstly, how do these 2 buildings fit together? And then secondly, what's the waterproofing? And you'd think that that's a relatively simple exercise, but it's been such a pain in the bum. And it made me think about building information modeling because I asked for the 3D model. Contrary to what my colleagues believe, I can actually work a Navisworks model now. And I was thinking, well, that would be the easiest way to understand it, but they don't have one. And this is a building that they started building in 2019, and they don't have a 3D model. And it really surprised me because I feel like the UK standard now for any significant building is you absolutely have a 3D model. And it made me think about, well, that's where industry is going. We're definitely getting more and more digital. Had an interesting chat with Paul about artificial intelligence and where that's going to go. So it's very significant, pertinent stuff. Let me introduce you to Paul. Paul is an architect by background. He's got degrees from Newcastle and Dundee. He's an authority on BIM, having authored a book and sat on various committees, writing the leading best practice on building information modeling. He's also got over 1,000 hours of training people, so he's a very good communicator. Outside of work, apparently Paul enjoys coffee, hiking, and learning Japanese. So if you want to make small talk, do that. Will you welcome with me, Paul? Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Great to be here and to learn from you all. To appreciate structural waterproofing and what it's all about. I'm certainly not an expert, as Ben says. I'm an architect by background, so it's really good to understand and learn what it is that you do on a day-to-day basis. So thank you for the opportunity to talk today. As I say, I'm an architect by background, but I've been at MBS for over a decade now. So working on specifications, developing the platforms where people specify buildings and tunnels, bridges, all of those things. Hopefully I can discuss BIM and building information modeling with structural waterproofing in mind and kind of put it into context for what you do. It's funny being talked about as an authority or an expert on anything. I always think of it as like experience. It's good to have lots of experience under your belt and lots of case studies that you can call on. Certainly not assuming that you know MBS. Oh, forgive me. There we go. Certainly not assuming that you do know who MBS are. We're a technology platform for the construction industry. Many of you will have used MBS specs in the past, J40, J10 type specs. They're created in MBS, but we provide platforms for thousands of users to find product data and specify buildings in all kinds of different ways. In terms of the content, it's then access to standards, the guidance, and we've got technical authors who work for us who are experts in their field. And recently, we became part of a Swedish headquartered group called Big Factor, which gives us the scope and resources to develop Uniclass and MBS and to continue to invest in those pieces of work. So it's our 50-year anniversary. Back in 1973, MBS was first produced as a paper document, and everything since then really has been a technological evolution, responding to photocopiers, desktop computing, web technologies, and now into the cloud with MBS Chorus. But really, the fundamental concept of standard clauses that can be adapted for a project hasn't changed, in 50 years. It's to fulfill a need. It's ensuring that people have access to a baseline where they can then adapt that for their projects. And rather than having to scribble on an old spec and retype that up or rekey it now, it's about having that in a cloud-based solution where people can work together. So that's now in the cloud with MBS Chorus. And the key thing here is the ability to access other information that's relevant. So that's guidance, that's standards, but it's also product information, information from suppliers and manufacturers of waterproofing solutions too. So BIM is a buzzword that's been around now, for 15, 20 years in the industry. In different ways, it's going to have been applied differently by many of you. I'm sure it generates some eye rolling and frustration in the audience as well. And I'm not just a BIM advocate with no self-awareness of that. But I think whatever concepts or images you have of BIM over the last 5 to 10 years, do be prepared to evolve them. The industry's maturing. The people involved have 10 years of experience of these technologies under their belt and are wanting to apply this in much more logical and practical ways, working together with different parts of the industry. So some people are BIM managers, and that is their whole careers. For others, it's a process. It's a standard similar to any other standard that you're applying. It is complex because it's trying to represent an entire built environment industry, but it's certainly not as complicated as some of the guidance might indicate that it is. And the reason for that is that it's data first. It tends to attract those people who are Excel spreadsheet wizards and Airtable and Notion wizards who want to catalog everything and classify everything. And so the processes can look very complicated. But fundamentally, there's a real logic behind it. And I think already the industry is moving to a place of understanding that it's about sharing information. So there are different definitions of it for those who aren't familiar, not expecting everybody to be. Building information modeling was the first kind of acronym, but there are others you'll have heard too, building information management and better information management even. But I think fundamentally the acronym is less important now. And this is my definition. It's certainly not an official one by any means. It's helpful, I think, in terms of simplifying it. It's a standardized process for managing information and for sharing it. And I think that's helpful because it gets us away from that idea that it's about visuals and 3D models alone. It's really about sharing quality data and providing the most up-to-date version of that for whatever the industry does. It's for management, and just like every manager, there are good and bad ones. So this is an example from the Dutch construction industry. These cartoons by a person called Maya Rutten are brilliant and describe different problems in the construction industry. And this one demonstrates the fact that information isn't being shared in a collaborative way. What happens is there tends to be a bit of a passing of the buck, the client passing to the designer to the contractor, to subcontractors, to FM and maintenance teams. And there's a few things to highlight in that drawing is that not all of the information is getting shared, so they're holding on to something that feels sort of like this is our IP. There's no communication happening, it's all happening just being thrown over the wall. And it also demonstrates a lack of diversity in our industry, which I think is being picked up on as well. But it's that lack of communication and lack of a linear process of who's responsible for which piece of data and how it gets shared. The other thing is that the nature of waterproofing, I think, really applies well in terms of some of these technologies and processes. Trying to do a blanket process across the whole built environment is always going to be tricky. But structural waterproofing in particular has benefits in terms of it's obviously a lot of subterranean work, it's a lot of groundwork. And this example from Farringdon is about manipulating the data to understand how the London Underground would be affected, how local piles and structures would be affected as a result of new development. And having that context of where all of those clashes would take place helps everybody to be on the same page at the earliest opportunity. Similarly, this one from Plowman Craven is of underground works and understanding what actually exists below the surface level. But it's not just about those visuals. Yes, they're really helpful in terms of coordinating when we need to work on those, but it's the data that's underneath. Click on one of those, it's an electrical cable. Who installed it? When was it installed? When was it last maintained? What does it connect to? And having all of that data in place is key to these parts of the industry. So, in terms of why it's important, why should you care? What are the benefits? Some of you may be suppliers who have invested in BIM objects and developing information specifically to those processes, and are thinking about return on investment, thinking about the benefits. So I am keen to provide some case studies and examples and some real quotes from specifiers that help to, I think, indicate a real value to the type of work that is being done. So the first is that within the Chorus platform itself, within specification, having access to product data is integral to people being able to specify. We hear time and time again that if the data is there, specifiers are more likely to use it. And we know from the statistics and analytics that we get from behind the scenes that it tends to stay there, that it tends to be when it's applied early, substitution is often reduced as well. So having that information present helps specifiers to make those decisions. And that's just on the specification side before we even get into some of the really detailed product data. It also demonstrates that you're thinking about the things that are important to them: performance, quality, material properties, sustainability, and that all of those credentials are taken care of within the information. On the product data side, then, we have a platform, MBS Source, where you can add that information. And 92% of our customers on the architects, engineers, surveyors side said that they needed access to product data. So across all of our users, thousands and thousands, 92% of them are looking for product data. And that's technical information, product data sheets, but it's also object, it's also guidance and technical information that you can provide as well. It's having access to the detail and the data behind the scenes as well that's so important. In this case, this Queen, I think, item, having the keyword BDA Agremont certificate, declaration of performance, descriptions, third-party approvals, those kind of things are what organizations are looking for their own requirements and their own things that they need to do on their projects. In terms of the 3D objects themselves, this is a Newton example, and the quality of the 3D information is fantastic across so many of the suppliers within this industry. Because it's about being able to demonstrate those interfaces and showing how these things actually will be applied in the real world, and the connections that need to happen between them. So having that understanding allows architects, engineers to get in really early and understand how these systems are going to be used. And equally, many of you will say, oh, well, we're only ever a 2D drawing, we're only ever a line on that drawing. And that is true too. And there are some really brilliant details and information that users can take to apply to their projects as well. For those who are saying, we're never going to be modeled, we're a coating or a render or a thin layer, and people don't model that stuff. I think it's getting away from that idea that it is a purely visual aspect. Yes, having that line on the drawing, having that thickness is going to be important. But actually it's the data behind the scenes. Within that square of the object that's actually downloaded is a huge amount of properties: thermal conductivity, compressive strength, permeability, its weight, its warranty. All of that property can be embedded within that object. But then also there's a link to that specification clause. So within that object, automatically the user is getting access to that specification, where you can add in, where you can add in all of that detail that's required alongside the particular object that's been used. And again, that idea of embedding it early, getting into the project and reducing substitution that happens. So within some of those examples, we're beginning to see a lot more about EPDs. That's come up a couple of times this morning. We're hearing directly from architects and engineers that access to EPD certificate information is really important. And even if you're showing a demonstration of having an embodied carbon figure, developing that information in time, that is going to be so much more valuable in the next 3 to 5 years as well. But increasingly, we could say that about fire as well. You know, the Building Safety Act part, the golden thread of information, demonstrating that you are thinking about the same things that they are, and that you're providing that information for them is incredibly important. So we've got a few examples from the survey that we did. This one in particular is about how often information is then verified to show that it's actually met the performance that's required. And you know, all of this data can be found within the survey itself. But basically, the product that was actually installed is the one that was specified. How often does that take place? And we know how important that is as a result of, you know, things that have led to the Building Safety Act. So you can begin to see exactly what's happening in industry and for our specifiers in particular. So I've picked out a few case study examples and quotes of how the BIM data is being used in real projects. I haven't been able to pick everybody as an example, so forgive me if the suppliers in the room find that they're not one of the examples that I've used. But also how BIM data is being used when we think about it holistically. All of the data, the digital information, the properties, and so on. And this Delta example of a 7-meter basement, you know, underground works, cavity drain membrane, and a swimming pool. One of the interesting things this morning I was interested to find out is it seems to me like about 10 years ago was sort of the peak of that idea of iceberg mega basements and, you know, moving huge amounts of excavation to create these things. But increasingly we're seeing a move, I think, towards understanding the importance and the integrity of structural waterproofing as part of all kinds of different developments. So for this Delta one, when I saw the images that are on this case study, I think they're extraordinary. This one almost looks like two photos stuck together. The quality is so good. But this also indicates a remedial work for a failed previous system that had been installed, and the fact that that's also part of the work. So if you do have examples like that, case studies where, you know, you've done work that's noteworthy, ensure that they are part of your product information, because it really does help specifiers to find and use your products. In terms of the product information itself, we hear from specifiers that manufacturers need to provide us with BIM objects, and that they're actively seeking to look for those. When we talked about the priority order of those, over a third said they were the most important thing for them as a designer. So that's, you know, compared to brochures and product data sheets and other things. Product data sheets still dominate, of course. People are just looking for the technical information. But over a third were starting from a point of view from the model and that information. This is Newcastle, where I'm from and where MBS are based. This is a Pudlow example. And, you know, I say I'm an architect by background. Similar to specification, which tends not to be taught in universities much, structural waterproofing certainly isn't as part of the majority of architecture courses. And so I already feel like I've learned so much, even just in terms of preparation for this, but understanding the different technologies and options that are available to organizations. In this case, the Pudlow example was used because the contractor and the supplier got together early, you know, pre-contract, working out how these things are going to work on site. There were health and safety issues, you know, the height of the slab creating working from height issues that meant a waterproofing concrete was a good solution. And also material storage, that a very tight city centre site meant that it was impossible to have a place to lift and store materials. So the waterproofing concrete became the example that gets used. And having that data in place on something like MBS Source means organizations can find it. So it's not just about product data, but having things like standards and best practice guides and so on, and being able to market and advertise using the technologies within there. Along with that, we understand that health and safety, COSH requirements, as we've said, sustainability is going to be increasingly important. So even though that you may have all the technical requirements and compressive strength and permeability, understanding how this works in the context of sustainability, fire strategies, and so on, is going to be integral. And we hear that from BIM managers now. I've been meaning to go and see this project in London, which is Cambridge House Hotel. So this is a Newton example, a brilliant case study, and the renders from PDP Architects, I think it is, are absolutely incredible for this. But it's those facade retention and extraordinary amount of subterranean work, I think 4 levels or something with this particular project. But having that 3D information early, we hear that over 2/3 use our digital objects. So even though we know that 90% of organizations are using the product data sheets, we've got 2/3 using the digital content. So really important to appreciate how these are being used. But I think it's that context of you're not just a line on a drawing, you're not just a layer that's not going to get modeled. Having the data in place really does help with specification and development. And this is one of those renders of the project that it's going to be. It used to be the In and Out Club in London and is now becoming a huge luxury hotel. But again, quotes directly from architects involved. If I find a product that has a model, I'm more likely to use it, and also that at the very, very least, have the ones that link to core specifications, and then that way we can pull that clause directly into our spec early on. Slightly different example from Fosrock in terms of they advertise their ability to work on specifications with organizations. So we know that for complex systems, of which structural waterproofing is absolutely one, again within that survey, about 1/3 are working with information themselves and have enough to do the spec as best they can. About 1/3 are working directly with a subcontractor, and about 1/3 are looking for that technical authoring, technical advisory role where you're actually coordinating that specification at work. And we are able now in the platform to provide you access to just a limited part. They can revoke it at any time, but it means that you can provide that expertise directly on those projects. So that can be really useful. And as an example of where that's been utilised, this is Ardley Energy from Waste Plant, over a 12-metre drop, artesian well, so extreme pressures, chemical salt things to deal with in terms of the chemical barrier, and understanding all of those aspects, means that they can begin to think about the project-specific specification, working with technical advisory and the expertise that you have inherently as part of your role. This one from Langley in terms of working with architects and engineers, but also contractors, building owners, FM teams, about maintenance and remedial work and how that happens in reality. So as I say, if there are case studies and examples of particularly unique specifications or projects that you've worked on, it's really worthwhile embedding them in and are more likely to provide the kind of data that our customers are looking for. So as I say, all of those quotes and statistics are available through this recent survey, What Specifiers Want, came out this year and is valuable in terms of understanding the context of a third of people are looking for that technical advisory, a number of people are working to use your data and to have access to things like EPDs and so on. So as a bit of a recap in terms of the platforms, MBS Source in terms of being able to select product data, work with manufacturer information directly. We've worked in terms of moving this to the cloud, particularly in terms of search and making sure that whatever term people are searching for, they find the information that you provide. But also in terms of comparison. So one of the things that you might do in terms of searching for a piece of technology, looking on the John Lewis website, Curry's website, being able to compare things like for like. The same is true of product information now. Show me all of the compressive strength, show me all of the permeability, and let me see which values compare. So being able to do that with the data requires us to structure it in a consistent way. So we work with suppliers to ensure that their data is structured consistently and then can be applied directly to the spec. Anyone who's been working in the industry for over a decade will know some of the legacy products that we had. So RIBA Product Selector, you may have known, MBS Plus, which was the specification link, and the National BIM Library, which was sort of the beginning of our BIM object journey. All of those have now been grouped and subsumed into MBS Source. So that's now the kind of one-stop home for all of that data and a really simple place for specifiers to go to. The benefit of that from a supplier perspective as well is that they're able to manage ranges themselves. So once that information is live, if things change in the ranges, if things change in terms of technical information, or you do get that EPD certificate, for a product that you've been asking for a while, you can update that information yourself. So you're not having to wait and be limited to some of the information that's there. You can manage that type of information. The more up to date it is, the more likely it is to be used, and you can see that verification process in the product. And then if you're interested in that liaison with architects and engineers and actually working directly on specifications, you can use MBS Chorus, as I say, access to those projects where people give the permissions to be part of it and have the ability to work directly on project information. That control, as I say, is in the designer's hands, so they can just give you access to the bits that are relevant, the green roof, the structural waterproofing, and so on. Talked earlier about the fact that architects and engineers will have varying levels of understanding about structural waterproofing, from very basic appreciation of different systems that are available, requiring your expertise and requiring that knowledge to make it actually work in practice. So if you are interested in any of that, do talk to me. As Ben mentioned, I'm going to try and rush to get back with the rail strikes and everything this afternoon. So wish me luck for getting back for a meeting at 8. But do check out the website and do get in touch with our teams because they would love to hear from you. So thanks very much.